Okay, we are now live. Oh, I wonder if I was supposed to go live with that like little thing so people are reminded. Am I supposed to do that? Does anybody know? Am I supposed to turn on that thing? Okay, it doesn't matter. Alicia is here. I'm gonna bring her on. Here we go. Hi, Rafki. Okay, we're waiting for Alicia to join us. Oh,
Hey,
hi. Hi.
how are you?
Good. Baruch Hashem, how are you?
Great, thank God. Can you hear and see me all right?
Yes, I can see you and hear you all right. Maybe actually just your like chin is almost at the bottom. Maybe I see I'm also a little bit interesting. If you can move yourself. Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
I have AirPods, but I found that I think this is fine, right?
That's totally fine. I'm wearing AirPods. Does my sound good?
Your sounds good, yeah.
Okay. So I wasn't sure if I was supposed to use that. Like, I don't know how to use Instagram really, but I think it's fine. I think people are being notified. They know that we're here. So let's dive in. Yes?
Hey, awesome.
Okay. So first, I'm just going to introduce you. Everybody, this is Ellie Sheva. She is a licensed psychotherapist in private practice, an author, blogger, and digital educator. And I brought Ellie Sheva on to discuss the topic of speaking about sexual abuse with our children in order to protect them, to prevent it, or yeah, to prevent and protect it as much as possible. So there were a lot of questions that came in. People wanted to know a lot of different things. And so we're going to try to cover all of them. And this is a really, really important topic. And I really appreciate that you took the time to be here and to share it with everyone.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for making the time to do it, because as you know, this is a topic that's really important to me too. So I'm really glad that we're here, and I hope that people will be able to avail themselves of the information that we're going to share.
Yes. Okay. So somebody just had the words all over your face. I think there's a way to take away like comments so that you can see Elishava better. But Elishava, yeah, do you want to move yourself a little bit up, more up?
Like that?
Is that possible? Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. That way they can see your face even if there's comments. Okay, amazing. All right, so I'm going to really just dive in with the questions and we'll go from there.
Great.
Okay, so the first one is, what are the basic principles of teaching sexual safety to your kids? Like what do you need to teach? And
Okay.
yeah.
So there are actually a lot of resources, books and websites and information and courses that you can do. But what I want to do is kind of pare it down for today to just the bare essentials, so that for those people who are really first kind of looking at this for the first time, you have that skeletal format and then you can springboard from there. And I hope, God willing, what we'll do is I will send you some things to link to share after the fact so you can do that. But I think we could break it down into a short list. So the first thing that we could talk about is types of touch. So that from a very young age, we can introduce children to this notion that there are different types of touch, that touch can feel nice. It's really important for kids to know that touch can feel nice, hugs and cuddles and back rubs and, paying attention. We're going to talk more about, tuning into the feedback from children about touch, but that touch can feel nice, because if we only scare them about touch, then we're also doing them a disservice. There's nice touch, there's ticklish touch, there's awkward touch, there's uncomfortable, there's pain, and there's inappropriate touch. In more recent years, the research has been moving away from good touch, bad touch, because that feels moralizing and shaming and confusing for kids, especially because sometimes when people are grooming, they will start by utilizing touch that does feel nice and that kids can interpret as good touch. So we try to be a little more specific, and we talk about safe and appropriate versus unsafe and inappropriate. But basically, appropriate and safe touch is when both people are happy and comfortable with the touch and it feels right. Inappropriate and unsafe touch is when it involves one person hurting another person or a child's private parts. So that's like pretty clear. The next thing that we're going to talk about is body autonomy. So that is the classic, your body is yours, your body belongs to you, other bodies belong to other people, and we're not allowed to hurt each other for no reason. Not only are we not allowed to hurt each other, but we shouldn't touch each other in a not hurting way without permission. So don't give somebody a big squeezy hug if they don't want one, or kiss them or pinch them. Even if you think you're being funny, it's not funny to touch someone if they don't want to be touched. No one is ever allowed to touch a child in their private parts, which are the parts of the body that are usually covered by a bathing suit. No one should ask you to touch their private parts. No one should ever ask you to take off all your clothing, including the parts that are touched by that are covered by a bathing suit, and they should never take off their clothes in front of you. And they shouldn't do this to you, and you shouldn't do this to others. Because what sometimes people leave out, a lot of parents are so busy worrying about their children not being victimized that they don't necessarily focus on making sure that their children don't also do inappropriate things to other children. So these are good opportunities when having these conversations to also instill that we don't want our children to be touched inappropriately, and we don't want them to touch other people inappropriately. So that's touch and body awareness, body boundaries. The next one is secrets, that no one's ever allowed to ask you to keep a secret from your parents, not a grown-up or a child. The only kinds of secrets that are okay, which actually, if you ask me, it's not even worth it to make this distinction, but if you really want to, you can make the distinction of like, if they're making a surprise party or buying someone a surprise present or a surprise treat and you don't want to tell them yet, but they're going to know soon, that kind of secret is okay. But any other secrets, telling a child you can't tell your mommy or daddy or teacher about this, that means that you should tell your trusted grown-ups. You know, you can have a network of trusted grown-ups, whoever the caregivers are. Any secret that involves a body or touching or videos or pictures or anything inappropriate of words having to do with private body parts, for sure, they should know that they could always come, and they should always come to their trusted grown-ups, and they won't get in trouble. So touch, body awareness, secrets. No one's allowed to take pictures or videos of you without your clothing on. And in fact, I actually think it's nice to get kids in the habit of always asking permission before taking pictures of anyone, and letting people know if or whether they want to be photographed or videoed at all. Although in our society, it's not so easy to do that, but just an awareness of like, don't just be snapping pictures of people. The next one is discomfort, general discomfort. This is a really good principle to keep in mind because it covers a lot of categories where predators or even just other children might be overstepping a boundary that kids might not fit neatly into some of the typical categories. Discomfort. So if someone is doing or saying or asking something that makes you uncomfortable, you can just say, no, this makes me uncomfortable. And then you can say, and now I want to go find a grown-up, right? And so when kids are empowered to notice if something makes them uncomfortable, that in itself is a really good skill to be able to have. And they don't have to be able to justify it. It's okay for them to just say, this is making me uncomfortable. And I think then there are also some other pieces that we're going to get to. For example, there's some, like, people think that stranger danger is a focus, but in the last decade or so, we've learned that most of the time that child sexual abuse happens, it's not at the hands of a stranger. It's usually somebody that's familiar. It's not only men. Sometimes people only talk about males, but sometimes it's females, even though it's usually males. But we shouldn't exclude females. And it's not only adults, sometimes it's also children. So these are just things to keep in mind from the old school way of talking about it, that we need to incorporate what we're learning as the years go by. Another idea that this is not something that's brought over in all the literature, but something that I think is a good idea to get in the habit of, is if your kids are young enough to set this precedent, that people should just not get in the habit of having one-on-one time with a child in a room with the door closed. So even if a kid is having a play date, or if grandma's playing checkers with the kid or whatever, you know what, in our house, we leave doors open. We just leave doors open. There's no one-on-one time. Even other children, even relatives, it's just, kind of set the stage for, not having that likelihood of those, dangerous secrets. So those are I think that's like a good broad overall, outline, and then we'll dive into some. So your listeners sent some really, really great questions that we discussed a little bit, and I'm excited to get into those too.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so just so everybody knows, within those things, we're going to actually give resources so people can actually look at them and talk to their kids about it. Okay, so if people ask, will talking to your kids really protect them from predators? Like, is this really going to help? Because there are people who said that my parents taught me and it didn't help me. I still got, will this really help?
Okay, so the answer is, unfortunately, we all wish probably as parents that we could just sort of get the magic bullet, bubble wrap our children, make sure that we know exactly what we need to do and say and practice to keep them safe. Unfortunately, there is no such thing. The same way we could go to all their pediatrician physicals and try our best to make sure that they have healthy environments, but sometimes they're going to get sick. So there's no foolproof way to make sure that our children stay out of any kind of danger. What educating them in the way that the research teaches us is so far the best way we know to educate them is setting our kids up for the least likely chances of someone being comfortable taking advantage of them. And so that they can get, if they are to find themselves in a situation where they could be taken advantage of, they know what to do to get away from that faster. And if somebody does overstep a line, so that they can come to a trusted adult and decrease the likelihood of that happening again, and if necessary, get the appropriate authorities involved so that it doesn't happen again to them or anyone else. If you guys stick around to the end, Blimie has a really powerful story that we're going to share at the end that really kind of illustrates this. But unfortunately, there is no foolproof way. And in fact, the research is always ongoing. The public interest in this topic is only a few decades old. And so we're constantly learning new issues that arise with regard to child safety, with regard to grooming and predators, and even within children themselves and the experimentation that sometimes results in children having unpleasant experiences, which aren't always trauma. We'll get into that. There's no guarantee. What we're offering are tools to, just to promote as much safety as we can. That's all we can do.
Right. Okay. So then my next question is related, is that isn't just having a good relationship with your kids enough? Some people were like, I don't think I need to tell them all this stuff and scare them or feel uncomfortable. What if I just have a good relationship and my child will know they can always come to me and tell me these things?
So it sounds nice in theory, and sometimes it works. But the reality is that there are so many, unfortunately, the statistics are alarmingly high of how many adults will report being touched inappropriately as children. And very often they will say, it's so weird because I wasn't the profile of the kid that should be targeted. I was close with my family and we did have a very honest and open relationship. But I guess this just felt like something that I didn't have a vocabulary or a precedence for, and I didn't really know how to bring it up. It was too uncomfortable, or the person who was touching me said I'm not allowed to tell my parents, so I thought this was different. So if, having a good relationship is one of those variables that will make it more likely that your child will come to you in the event of something happening, but it doesn't give them the tools to handle a situation to avoid, the likelihood of this happening. And also after the fact, it could prevent a lot of unnecessary extra suffering. And so, yes, having a good relationship with children is great. And in fact, there are, I don't know if there's studies, but certainly anecdotes where people said all the right things to the children, but because the children didn't feel comfortable coming to the parents anyway, it still wasn't enough. So I think you really need both, have an honest, open, loving, expressive, communicative, also giving them the knowledge, the information, the tools, and the vocabulary so that when things come up, and I almost say when, because not everything is abuse, but sexual issues are going to come up for children, that they know that their trusted adult caregivers are the address to turn to with these situations and information and questions as they arise. So yeah, I think it's having a great open relationship with your child is a great start, but I don't, in my humble opinion, think that's all it is. I think there's more to it than that.
Yeah, and I love that you said that you need both, because I really believe that strongly. There are people who have told me, like you said, anecdotally, that their parents did teach them, but they never went to their parents because they didn't feel safe or comfortable. So we need to create both. I think we need both. Okay, what are appropriate ways to address body parts with toddlers and kids?
I love that question because it starts with the toddlers. My opinion, and the opinion, the widespread clinical opinion, is that the younger you start giving children clear, biologically accurate, neutrally charged names for all of their body parts, including their private parts, their genitals, everything, the less complicated it is for them. If you tell a 2, 3, 4-year-old when they're playing head, shoulders, knees, and toes what their other body parts are, their private parts are called, even in very specific detail, they're not going to giggle because they don't know to giggle, right? They don't know that there's any difference between their elbow and their vulva or their penis. So, if you just kind of say it in this matter-of-fact way, without getting awkward, without blushing, without getting, all frazzled from it, then kids will take their cue and they'll know. So it seems to be, and I have a whole article on this, we can link it, that teaching kids the names of their body parts increases their safety because it just makes them more confident and clear and autonomous about their bodies. And it's also a good long-term investment for having a good relationship with their bodies, and hopefully at the right time, a good sexual relationship with a partner, because there's no shame. It's just like, oh, this is part of what I am. This is my healthy, body that I have, and I'm grateful to live in. And so also it gives kids a vocabulary, even not in case of abuse. Let's say a kid has, a pimple on their penis and they say, oh, mommy, I have something here. Can we deal with it? As opposed to, if there's an infection or, there's a lot of stories of people who either got a period or got an infection or something came up and they suffered longer than they needed to because they were just too embarrassed to turn even to a parent or a doctor and say, oh, something happened and I need some help. So we want to give kids, for a lot of different reasons, accurate information. And just let them know. And if you're uncomfortable, because I think one of the other questions brings this up, like, oh, what if my kid is going to be the one in kindergarten who comes with all the vocabulary that the other parents didn't teach their kids? Okay, so either you can teach your child, in our house, we call all of your private parts by their proper names because we like to say the right words. But, when you go to school, they are called private parts. So when you're at a friend's house or in school, you could just say private parts if you need to refer to them. Because they're private, and if they end up sharing the information in an, biologically accurate, respectful way, and that's how other kids find out about it, newsflash, kids inform other kids anyway. Let your kid be the one to be sharing the healthful, biologically accurate way of talking, and hopefully that'll set a good trend.
Right. So that's my next question, really. And it's just that somebody said, like, in my community, people don't teach their kids the names of private parts. Like, is there a way to do it that matches, like, my religious sensitivities?
Yeah. Okay, so I have a couple of answers to this. My first answer is my ideal answer, which is we can affect positive change in our communities by incorporating healthy, beautiful values, even where they're missing in certain places. So if you have the confidence to do that, then I strongly encourage you to do what I said before, which is educate your children when they're young enough to know that it's not like juicy and a big deal. Just teach them the information, and then hopefully other families will hear these things and recognize the value of them, and it just won't be taboo. It will just be regular, right? So like, it's almost like, imagine like not telling your kid about periods because like, oh, you don't want them to go to school and say period. Well, they're going to get a period one day and they're going to need to deal with it. Same thing with their genitals. Like they're going to need to deal with them too. And so, you know, and they have genitals well before they have periods. You know, and this is, I mean, this is a broader part of sex ed, which we'll talk about soon. But that's, you know, that would be my answer. Now, if someone says to me, no, I simply can't, does that mean that I'm just going to be in the dark and my kids won't know anything? My answer is like this. If you, for your own personal reasons, and remember I disagree with this, but if you feel like you need to use euphemism because you're just not okay using the accurate names, just come up with specific euphemisms and use those consistently and talk about all of the things you need to talk about in terms of safety, in terms of development, in terms of sensation, in terms of boundaries, all of that, and just use your euphemistic words consistently. And then that's the language that your children will know. You know, and so again, and likewise, I always give this story when my kids were very little, they were in a very religious school, and we had some kids come over. We had a child who was over, and they were like, my girls were like 5 and 7. And this little kid says to my daughter, you know, my mom's having a baby. I mean, I don't know how they're going to get it out of her or anything, but, you know, and my younger daughter said, oh, I could tell you there's a hole between the legs, and, you know, the doctor will come and and a special thing happens and the hole gets bigger, and God makes a miracle because it gets bigger than like for a baby, and it's so great. And then the baby comes out and the mommy's body heals. And I'm listening to this from the top of my stairs, and I'm going, oh, wait, hold on. It's a really religious family. So I pulled over my daughter and I was like, did you just tell her like how the baby comes out? And she said, yeah, because she didn't know. So I told her, I said, but what did I tell you about that information? She said, we're not allowed to talk about it in school. It's like, oh, good point. Okay, well, we also don't talk about it on play dates. So I called this mom right after Shabbos. It was on a play date on Shabbos, and I called the mom and I was like, I need to apologize. This is what happened. You need to know. I totally understand if you never want to send your kid to play in my house again. And the mom was so sweet. She said, I tell this story a lot. She said, you know, I'm so grateful because my kid kept asking me and I didn't have a good answer for her. And I'm sure whatever she heard in your home was, you know, a healthy, holy, good response. I literally have a course on healthy, holy sex ed. So she felt good about that. And so this is like the worst case scenario where your child has biologically accurate, not giggly information, and they end up sharing it. And then, you know, any responsible parent would probably just be fine with that. And if they're not, it doesn't matter because we need to do what's right for our children. And we need to do what's healthy. So
right. I was just gonna say that, like, it's not the end of the world. I teach them to my kids. Probably most of the students in their class, the parents don't. And my kids know not to say it, but I think they have by mistake mentioned it here or there. First of all, I think the other kid doesn't even remember the word because it's something that's so not even like they're aware of. Yeah. And also, okay. And so it's not the end of the world. You know, it's more, I'd rather my children know.
Yeah, they're going to learn curse words from each other. They're going to learn dirty jokes from each other. Like, they're going to pick up stuff from each other. Let them at least pick up healthy, holy, accurate, you know, the kind of stuff that they, you know, that's good for them to know.
Yeah, I am completely in agreement with you. Okay, so the next question is, what about teaching kids the names of the opposite sex's genitalia? So if you have a girl, do you have to teach them what a penis is? Because it's not their body part.
I say yes. I'll tell you why. First of all, I mean, again, like, you want your child to grow up and be able to have a sexual relationship, and that doesn't happen I mean, some people expect it to happen overnight, but it doesn't happen well when you leave it to overnight. But even well before that, from a sexual safety perspective, because that's our official, you know, topic for today. So if your daughter doesn't know what a penis is, and then some guy says to her, you know, if even she's at a friend's house and the brother says, hey, do you want to see my penis? Do you want to touch my penis? And she thinks that it's a toy or a candy or something, you know, she's going to be in for a rude surprise. Where if she has the knowledge of what that is, she can say, no, I don't want to see that. You know, that I was taught that I'm not supposed to do that, and you're not supposed to do that either. And then she can kind of stand. And knowledge is power. So again, you know, we want children to have biologically accurate information, and you know, both for safety and for their long-term, you know, relationship with their bodies, and hopefully at the right time with their partners. So that's to that.
Yeah. Okay. Is it better for one parent to talk to their children about this body safety and body parts and all that stuff, or both?
So I like that question because it gives me the opportunity to get on my little soapbox and say that people often talk about, whether you're talking about sex ed or sexual safety, they'll talk about the talk, right? As if there's one like sort of revelatory, apocalyptic conversation that's going to just make everything good forever. Anything that's important in education requires repetition, right? So think about your kids learn the multiplication tables. You don't just tell them to them once. They do them hundreds and hundreds of times just so that they know, their multiplication tables. Repetition and review help them integrate and internalize and know the information. Even more so, right, matters that are actually, part of their, human, psychological, spiritual wellness development, right? So if we want our children to be nice people, we don't one time tell them about please and thank you, right? Hundreds of times over their childhood, we teach them please and thank you. We teach them about kindness. We teach them to have confidence in themselves. Like all of the values that we want to give over to our children, we do them repeatedly. And so the same thing here. The answer to the question of should it be just one parent or both parents is the answer is it could be both, either both, lots of opportunities, lots of situations, really dozens of times over the course of the childhood, opportunities present themselves for both parents together and each parent individually to reference both, again, sexual safety and psychosexual development in ways that are, healthy and open and encouraging, and positive and really, kind of set the stage for development that will gear them towards having a good relationship with their body and boundaries with other people's bodies and to be primed at the right time to be able to enjoy a healthy sexual relationship with the right person.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I love that. Okay. This is a big question, and a few people ask this, is how can I talk to my children about all this stuff without instilling fear or paranoia? Like I'm saying, people shouldn't touch you and they might do things that are not okay and, all that. And how my children they're going to basically skew, like their sexuality is going to be skewed to being like a negative, fearful, terrible thing, right?
Yeah. So, okay, this is a really, really important question. So it's my opinion, and I think probably the opinion of most professionals on this topic, that sexual safety and body boundaries should be embedded in a broader parent curriculum. And I say curriculum, I don't mean you need to have like actual textbooks, although that if you need books, then you should use them. But a broader parental exposure and program of social skills, of body boundaries in general, of kindness, of interpersonal relationships, of emotional intelligence. So for example, it's not just, if you're going to sit down one day and say, oh, by the way, there are people out there who want to hurt your private parts, so here's what you need to do to keep yourself safe. That's alarming. That's a stressful thing for a child to hear. On the other hand, if let's say there's so many different opportunities. So let's say your kid it's happened once in our house, right? There's a play date and my friend wants to braid my hair. Right? It's like, well, do you want her to braid your hair? No, she just really loves making braids. So this is a great opportunity. We're not talking about anything sexual or anything even having to do with safety, but we're giving them the skills to say, you know what, if you don't want someone to braid your hair, this is a great opportunity to say, like, thank you so much for offering to braid my hair, but I don't want my hair braided right now. If your, Uncle George wants to give your kid a big squeezy hug and throw them up in the air and your kid doesn't like that, you can say, oh, you know what, Uncle George, Yaakov doesn't like hugs, he just wants to wave hello, and to teach children to respect their own boundaries and how to speak back to adults, talk back to adults in a way that's specifically not alarming and scary, because predatory adults and older children will pick up on cues from children who know how to say back off and have the confidence and the clarity to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to give that hug, I'm not going to give that kiss, I don't want you to tickle me. And so I think that it's part of a broader psychosexual education process, so that we're teaching them, when we're teaching them positive touch as well, right? So like if you sometimes your kid might be crying, instead of just grabbing them, say, oh, come here, baby, right? And like smothering them, would you like a hug? Would you like to come sit with me? Would you want to sit on my lap? Kind of like teach them even from a very young age to tune into what they want and not impose even our own touch on them. And certainly to teach them not to submit to unwanted touch or impose their unwanted touch on anyone else. So when it's sort of embedded in this broader way of doing parenting, where we teach children to respect their personal space and respect other people's personal space, and then sometimes we don't even. I mean, I think it is good to teach about parts under the bathing suit and private parts, and sometimes people want to go too far and they want to play doctor. We need to teach them those things. But even if you don't spell those out yet, or even if they're not remembering that, if somebody's getting too close, if someone's making them uncomfortable, if something gives them the creeps, then they know, they're like, I want to go sit in the living room now, or I want to go back, I want to go home now, or I want to go to my mommy, you know, and that way they're getting this general idea of no one has the right to make them physically uncomfortable. And if they do, they can assert their personal space. I forgot what the question was.
Yeah, no, the question was, how can I do without instilling fear and paranoia? And yeah, and when we spoke about it, you mentioned one more thing that I think is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you remember what it was?
What did I tell you?
No, it's fine, no problem. About teaching our kids positive sexuality. That basically we can't just teach them about all this stuff. We also, and then this is like a whole other conversation that you're very passionate about, and so am I. So yeah, do you want to take it away?
Oh yeah, no, I literally have a whole course on. Yes, I can't believe I didn't say that. So yeah, one of the big critiques of the good touch, bad touch model of sexuality is that it's all bad or all good. And the reality is that we want to teach children about positive touch and positive experience, and that private parts are actually enjoyable to touch for grown-ups. And that's why in the beginning when I was talking about body boundaries, that we talk about inappropriate touch is children's body parts, children's private parts. And, you know, as they get older, as they have, this is a broader conversation, not for our life, but in general, when you are more open to teaching children about you know, sexual topics, then it becomes just part of this broader curriculum. We don't do this now, we don't do this later. We do this later when you're a grown-up. We don't do this with people who could hurt you or who you don't want them to touch you, but when you get older and you find somebody that you love, then you could kiss them on the mouth, and then you can be naked with them, you know, and that way they have a frame of reference for nudity and for sexual pleasure, for, you know, arousal, you know, all the stuff that they're going to experience over the course of their childhood and adolescence. It's not something that we're going to be like doing a switcheroo at the last minute when they're old enough to become sexually active. It's something that's incorporated into sex ed as they go through their, you know, their development as children. So yeah, it's a really important point. Thanks.
Yeah, so Elisheva actually has a course all about this, which I love. I actually took it myself online about teaching our kids about sexuality in every single way, not just about predatory behavior or, you know, abuse, but about sex in general, and having this conversation in general, like you said, because it's not just like one day you just have a sex life. It's something that it's a process over time where you want children to really learn about it. So, okay, how do I teach a 2-year-old consent?
It's a great question. I think that the messages of consent start even before a child is verbal. So do you ever see sometimes somebody will be holding a baby as young as like 7-8 months old, and it's so clear that that baby is like straining from the adult and they want to go down on the floor to play, and the adult is just like squeezing the baby and kissing them and wanting to hold them. So that is always like kind of hard for me to see, because it's so clear. It's just like, no, it's not judging individual people, but it's selfish to grab hold of a child for our own, you know, cuddling wants when it's clear that that child doesn't want to be held. There are times where we need to just put a child in a stroller or a car seat or scoop them out of a crib because we have to go somewhere. But for the most part, you know, taking a child physically because you want to do something that's fun for you with them, and that's not, they don't want to be doing, is not something that we should be doing with children, and not something that we should be allowing other people, even siblings, to do with children. So even if, and obviously there's a limit to how much you can police this, but like to train the older children, like, you know, don't be tackling your baby just because they're so cute. If the baby's not enjoying it, say, look, the baby doesn't seem to be enjoying it. And that's how you teach a baby consent, right? And consent in the, you know, socio-political sphere is more verbal, but it starts even at a younger age. And likewise, if that 2-year-old is playing with another 2-year-old, right, and starts to grab their hair or squeeze their cheeks, or, you know, kids will explore the world through touch. And so what we do is, in a non-shaming way, we kind of say, no, we don't squeeze your friend. No, we don't squeeze your baby. No, you know, and show them how we respect body boundaries for other people. And you can do this with toddlers, right? You can do this even with babies, right? If you're holding a baby and the baby starts pulling your hair, you uncurl their little fists and you say no, and you kiss their hands, say, don't pull my hair, you know. And we teach them about consent by honoring their boundaries to whatever extent we can. You know, if they need a diaper change, they need a diaper change. Sometimes you just have to change their diaper. But as we were saying, even a 1.5-year-old who's usually not going to be toilet trained, you could say, come, we're going to change your diaper now, you know, and talk to them about it rather than just scooping them up and holding them down onto the changing mat. You know, as much as we can to narrate and dialogue and explain and sort of engage them rather than just overpowering them and steamrolling them. And in general, this is true. You know, sometimes it's so much easier and faster to just scoop up a little kid who's not cooperating And sometimes that's necessary. I mean, if we're being realistic, you don't always have the luxury to sit and reason with them. But as often as possible, and certainly when it's in, their best interest, not because, we want them to go and pose for a picture, or we want them to come and cuddle with grandma, like that's not okay. So, to whatever extent we can, to respect their body boundaries, to show them that we don't want to do anything to their body that we don't have to without permission. And when we do have to do things to like kind of explain and engage and talk to them and say, are you ready now? Should we do it together? Let's take a deep breath, and kind of help them tune into their own, body. And if, and kids have different needs for touch. I remember when my boys were little, they were 2 years apart, and my older one was more, like sometimes he would be like, no touch, no touch. He used to say like back off, like he just needed his personal space. And my younger one was very different, and he would say like, more kiss me, more kiss me. And it was such an interesting, like from when they were tiny, and so being able to tune into what the children are telling us with their, nonverbal or very, primitive verbal communication, that's how you teach little kids about consent from a very young age.
Okay, awesome. So there was another, hold on. Okay, it's fine. Let me go on to the next question. Okay, because there was something related to this that I wanted to ask that I think comes up later, is that basically, do I have to ask my kids permission every time I hug and kiss them?
It's a good question. I mean, it's obviously cumbersome. I think just kind of piggybacking off of what I was saying before, I think if you're not sure, then it's good to ask, say, would you like a hug or can I give you a kiss? What might be worthwhile is if you have one of those kids who's more sensory seeking, who seems to always want to be, climbing on your lap and smooching your face and like climbing, that kid seems to always be, craving it. You can say, I never want to like give you hugs or kisses that you don't want. Should I always just assume you want a hug and kiss unless you tell me otherwise? So that kid, if they're old enough to understand the question, will be like, yeah, I always want your hugs, mommy. I always want them. And then you could say, okay, but let's make a deal. If you ever don't want a hug, then just tell me, mommy, I don't want a hug right now. And I promise I won't be upset. It won't hurt my feelings. Right. And on the other hand, if you have a kid who's more wired like the personal space kind of kid who needs the warning or just doesn't always want it, then you can say, I love you so much. And so I always have love in my heart for you, but I know that you're not always in the mood for a hug or kiss. So should I ask you before I give you one? And they might say, yeah, could you please ask me every time? Or you might say, like, should I just put out my hands or like make a face, like, and you kind of establish a repartee with each child based on their own needs. But I think when in doubt, it's always good to ask. But we don't want to err too much on the side of caution, because sometimes those children who are a little standoffish when they're younger, they might interpret you're not giving them as much affection as as another child is. Maybe they don't love me as much. And that's why, if their love language is not touch, you want to figure out ways to communicate your love in other ways, or to say, what, I used to do this with one of my kids. I was like, they didn't want to hug. So I'd be like, what, I'm giving you an air hug, okay? And they would laugh because it was just, so there's lots of different ways to express, and communicate our love to our kids. And one of the best ways to do it is to say, what, I want to show you love in ways that's meaningful to you, not necessarily just what I'm in the mood to do. So I guess the short answer is, I don't think it's necessary to ask every single time, but it is necessary to establish what the preferences and needs are of your child. And when in doubt, to like play it safe and ask and talk about it.
Yeah, so I actually decided to go ahead and ask my children, once I heard this idea, to ask them what they want, instead of making the decision myself. I said, would you want me to ask you every time, right? And actually, they both said they would want. So that's what I do, and they love it. They appreciate it. Yeah. So that works for us, and what's so amazing about that is, like you said about not taking it personally, is they ask each other also, can I give you a hug? Yeah. And, I was dropping them off at camp, and every single day before they would go, my younger one would ask the older one, can I give you a hug? And the older one, most times, she's the one who's like, not so touchy, right? She'd be like, no. And the younger ones would just completely, like, I saw her reaction, not take it personally at all, just be like, okay. And I remember being like baffled by that, because if I was that kid, I would take it so personally, I'd be so personally offended. Like, she doesn't want a hug from me, but because it's something that's so usual and something that they're used to, it becomes something that they don't take personally, which I think is amazing. And I love that.
Yeah. I love what you just said also, because I think it shows how when we model sophisticated, healthy, communicative, respectful relationships between our, us and our children, then they go ahead and do that, and there's like sort of a stereotype, and it's a true stereotype where, kids in homes where there's a lot of, smacking and yelling are often, those are going to be the kids that are sometimes going to act aggressively, because that's the language that they absorbed around them. Whereas a child who absorbed the language of like, wow, my body's being respected, my feelings are being respected, so I'm being spoken to in a way that really honors you know, what I need, is gonna be more likely to be able to do that with other children, which is a wonderful relationship modeling, both for siblings and for friends, and, you know, God willing, at the right time, for a partner. So this is a really great long-term and short-term investment in parenting. And once it's kind of in your mindset, it's not so hard to implement. You know, it's a different way of doing things, you know, and depending on where everyone is on their, you know, parenting journey, it's, you know, and by the way, this is something I think is really important to say. I'm sure you say this a lot in your parent trainings, is that, you know, if your kids are a little bit older and you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, like, I didn't do this until now, I hope I didn't mess up my kids, like, chances are you didn't mess up your kids, but there's always time to, you know, implement and learn new things, and even to have conversations. Like, if your kids are old enough, say, you know, I was listening to something and I was reading something and I was hearing a talk and I learned something new and I just wanted to share it with you. And, you know, modeling to our children that we're always growing and learning and improving and sharing new things is also really great. So don't be beating yourself up too much if your kids are already a little older and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm that mom who smothers their kids with slobby kisses and I hope I didn't mess them up. So now you won't, you know. And it could be we'll say, I love when you do that, and in which case you can keep going. But if your kid says, actually, I really don't like it so much when you do that, then that's a really great opportunity to have a conversation, you know, sooner than later.
Yeah. I definitely have to do that, by the way. I wasn't always this way. Okay. This leads into the next question, is that how do I'm afraid of my kid abusing another kid. Like, how do I preempt that? How do I, like, stop that from happening?
Yeah. So this is also a really important question. I have an article on it, so I'll send it to you to link. Okay. But the gist of it is basically kind of what I touched on before, which is that whenever we're talking about these curricula of safety and you know, types of touch and what's okay and what's not okay, appropriate, inappropriate, safe and unsafe, we're going to talk about both ways. So, you know, nobody's allowed to touch you in your private parts, and you're not allowed to touch anybody else in their private parts. Nobody is allowed to ask you to do something that makes you uncomfortable, and you shouldn't do something that makes someone else uncomfortable. You know, and somebody's writing, this is helpful with grandchildren too. Yes, this is not just about parents. This is about any adult-child relationship. And also, for those of you who have children that are different ages, you know, your 5-year-old probably thinks of your 16-year-old as an adult. So, you know, different children of the same ages as well. This is all social skills, emotional intelligence, interpersonal relationships. So yes, you know, as parents or caregivers, it's our job to set the tone and give over these skills. But this is true, you know, for teachers and for, I saw a video years ago, this was so nice, this video of a teacher standing in front of a classroom, and there were like 3 or 4 pictures on the wall, and the kid would point to the picture, and either they could, based on the picture they point to, they could ask for a hug, a high five, a fist bump, or just a wave. And it was like, to me, that felt like such a beautiful way to empower children to check in with themselves and say, like, you know, my teacher wants to share some warm feelings with me, but I don't necessarily want touch, so let's figure out, you know, what would be, you know, and which I thought was really fantastic.
Yeah, I've seen that. I also love it. It's great. Okay. Another question. Someone asked, at what age should I stop showering with my kids? So this is assuming that some parents do shower with their kids. At what age should they stop?
So this is kind of cultural and relative and subjective. My, again, culturally biased opinion is I would not encourage parents to shower with kids at all, other than maybe like if you have you know, a tiny baby and you have nobody to watch the baby, so you just take the baby in for a shower with you. But honestly, past the age of like 6 months, I wouldn't do it if you don't have to. Just simply because we want to be modeling appropriate boundaries, and seeing a grown-up naked body is not something that a child needs. Again, if you've already been doing this and your kids are a little bit older, it doesn't mean that they're scarred for life. It's just my recommendation not to do that, you know, unless we need to.
Okay. Now, this, after sharing about sex with a 14-year-old, he became a bit obsessive. So the question, I guess, is like,
what do we do now?
What should I do? Yeah. Yeah.
So my answer is like this. If your child is hearing about sex for the first time as a 14-year-old, I prefer that not be the case. You know, I think 14 is very, you know, on the old side for a kid to first be getting sexual information for the first time. But if that is the case, then it is 1000% normal that a kid would be obsessing about it, because they're playing a lot of catch-up information instead of like, I believe in doing this IV drip of, you know, age-appropriate information. That is something, well, I guess we'll link to the course if people want to look at it, but, you know, age-appropriate information of all different kinds of sexual material that they can kind of incorporate as they go through the life cycle. But if a child is going to be inundated with it at the beginning of puberty at 10, 11, 12, even 14, so it's totally normal that they're going to be obsessed. And in fact, most kids, the majority of healthy psychosexual developmental kids will go through a time period where they're obsessing about their sexuality, obsessing about nudity, curious about their genitals, confused about what's happening to their developing puberty and body parts. So I would just normalize it. The kid has a lot of questions, answer the questions. Don't shame them. Let them, have all their thoughts and feelings. If they say, it's so weird, I can't stop thinking about naked people, say, that just means that you're going through puberty. It's your hormones. It'll calm down soon, but we can talk about any questions that you have. But I wouldn't be too worried about that unless they're acting out and touching people inappropriately. But if they're coming to you as the parent and they're saying, I'm having all these thoughts and feelings and my penis is getting hard and I'm, curious about everything, then that's what's supposed to happen.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so many great questions. We'll get to them at the end. Right. Okay.
If we have time.
I saw so many good, yeah. If we have time. There's so many great questions coming. Okay. So, yeah, by the way, I just want to say, put it out there. I was totally obsessive when I first found out about it too. I was like, yeah, I think it's very normal when you're just like, what? You don't know what to do with the information. I like the idea. Yeah, exactly. When it's a slow thing and children are sort of used to it, I think they just find it so much less alarming. It's just like, okay, whatever, fact of life,
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I could definitely see that with my own children. Okay. How can you call touch? This is a lot of people ask this question because the short story I shared was about child-on-child sexual abuse. So people said, how can you call it abuse when it's between two kids?
Okay.
Like, wouldn't it need to be an adult who's older or like an older kid with a much younger kid? How can it be like, and also does calling touch between same age children, does it trivialize real abuse for survivors?
Okay. So these are all really, really important questions. Let's go through each of them. Okay. So is it possible that touch between children could be called abuse, even the same age children? And so some people say that that's not the case, that if they're just kids the same age experimenting with each other, then it's innocent and they're just playing doctor and that's normal. And sometimes that's true. However, I would not say that it's never abuse just because the children are the same age. And I'll give you sort of like evidence of that. Take two adults, right? You have two 25-year-old adults. Is it irrelevant to say that just because they're the same age, there's no power differential, that no one's taking advantage of the other, there's no manipulation or violence or aggression or demand involved? No, of course we know that adults can be abused by people the same age or even younger than them. And so likewise, sometimes when children experiment with each other, you show me yours and I'll show you mine, or let's play doctor, or, let's just get naked and take a shower together. Sometimes that's just sort of innocent experimentation and we don't need to get all alarmed about it. Again, we do want to educate children that this is not something that we approve, but we also don't need to go getting all freaked out about it. They aren't necessarily traumatized. It's not necessarily abuse. But if a child is bullying another child and saying, I'm locking my door, you're not allowed out of the room, and now you have to do this and this to me, or you have to let me do that and that to you, and the other child is scared and intimidated and it's not their house, and the other kid says, if you don't do what I say, then I'm going to tell everybody that you're a nerd and they're not going to want to be friends with you and you can't come to the sleepover party, that's a form of abuse. Yeah. Is it the same as getting jumped by a stranger in an alley and being raped? No, but there are always gradations of abuse. And so one person's trauma doesn't trivialize or mitigate another person's. Not every time a person experiences sexual touch at the hand of someone that wasn't supposed to touch them, is it abuse? Or is it perceived as abuse? If it's perceived as abuse, then it's abuse. Not everybody that experiences abuse is traumatized. So there are gradations of molestation, of grooming, of crossing boundaries, of impropriety. And sometimes people will beat themselves up and say, like, I don't understand why I'm so affected by this. It wasn't such a big deal in the scheme of things. But to them and to their nervous system and to their, developing psyche, it was a big deal, right? And so the same way we don't want to trivialize the abuse of survivors of violent, very objectively traumatic sexual abuse, we also don't want to trivialize the trauma of people who had things happen to them that were more subtle, but still processed very much in a PTSD way in their nervous system. So it's not for anyone to tell somebody else whether what they experienced was abuse or trauma. It goes based on the individual experience and how it affected them and how it was processed. So yes, it could be abuse between children of the same age. It could certainly be abuse between children of different ages. A child being touched by an adult is always abusive, even if the child reports that it was pleasurable. I have an article on that too. Just because your body responded with arousal to the abuse doesn't mean it wasn't abuse. A lot of people carry lifelong shame because they became orgasmic or they had arousal in response to abusive touch. Doesn't make it not abusive. And power differential is one of those things that it's one of the variables, and age is one of the variables. But ultimately, when we talk about safety, propriety, and consent, that is something that transcends ages. So yeah, think that answers the question.
Wow, and I like that you said that abuse with an adult and a child, it is always abuse, right? Whereas
Yeah,
with children, it's not always.
When it's sexual
Yeah.
touch, meaning like,
Right.
yeah.
Right, of course. Right. Okay, so here's another question. If family members can be a threat, how can we teach them to be loving and still cautious, right? Because like you just said, it's usually not strangers. It's actually friends and family mostly. That's what the studies show.
Yeah.
So if it can be those people, then how do we teach our children, to be loving? But
family, camp counselors, teachers, coaches, a lot of familiar neighbors, cousins. Okay, so there's a statement in the Talmud that says respect and suspect. Kabdehu v'chashtehu. Okay, so again, this is when we embed sexual education and sexual safety education into a broader curriculum of people skills and emotional intelligence and general parenting messaging, where we want to give over the messaging is that we love people and we smile at people and we're kind to people and we're welcoming of people, but we also have our bubble, our personal space, our body boundaries. And so if anybody makes us feel uncomfortable, even if it's somebody that we love and care about, we can say that makes me feel uncomfortable. And it could be as simple as, let's say, if grandpa says, oh, you know what, can you run across the street and borrow an egg? You can just respectfully say to grandpa, oh, my daddy doesn't let me cross the street yet. My mommy says I need the grown-up to cross the street for me. So it's not disrespectful. It's just informing like, oh, these are the rules that I was raised with. And so again, when we start with a young age and we repeat and we give it over with like clarity and confidence and non-judgmental and not with like catastrophizing, then they know this. And that way, you're just kind of like teaching your children the same way if a kid had an allergy, right? They would go, oh, I'm not allowed to eat this because they have peanuts, right? Oh, we don't, I'm not allowed to go in a room with somebody and close the door. In my family, like we're not allowed to do that. Those are our rules. And again, it's not a foolproof guarantee, but it sure helps. It makes a really big difference. So so we can teach, and other than if somebody is like, an offender or someone who's actually dangerous, just like anything else that we have somebody in our lives that are doing that we might necessarily agree with, right? So let's say your sister is showing your daughter a video and you don't want her to see that video, not because it's pornography, but let's say it has a curse word or it has something in it that you just don't want your kids to see. So you can just like teach your child or tell your sister, oh, thank you so much for letting her play on your phone, but actually we don't let her watch those kind of video clips yet, And that way, when you're dealing with healthy, respectful relationships where people care about you and your child, you're just sharing the rules of your home. Same way if like, your mom wants to play another game with your kid, but it's their bedtime, like, oh, mom, thank you so much, but actually they have to go to bed now. Make it uncomplicated, and it can be uncomplicated. And people who don't respect the boundaries even after that, sorry.
Yeah, you're not invited into my home.
Our rules,
Yeah, exactly. Okay, how do we answer kids if they ask us whether we experience sexual abuse?
Okay, that's a heavy question, and I'm not comfortable answering it in a fell swoop kind of way. A lot has to do with the individual parent survivor and what happened to them, and the age and temperament of the child asking the question, the context of the question. I would say that in general, whenever a child asks a parent a personal question about the parent themselves, about their history, about their sexuality, about money, about anything that's not necessarily something you want to be sharing with your child. What we want to do is we want to tell our children, you can always ask us anything. You can always come to us and ask us anything. But there are some topics that are private. And so I might not want to answer you. And so I'll answer you in a general way. So if they say, Mommy, did anybody ever touch you inappropriately when you were a child? If you want to share your experience because you feel like your child can handle it and you can handle it, and there's a context and a way of sharing it that's not traumatizing for them, then that's your prerogative, and you can do so with caution and maybe track your child's facial expression and their response. Are you okay hearing this? But I don't think it's necessary, neither in terms of the child nor in terms of the parent. It's okay to just say, it happens to a lot of people in different ways. Most of the time, people are safe. And by the way, I just also want to point something out. As much as a lot of this education revolves around teaching our children how to supposedly keep themselves safe, this is by no means putting the responsibility on the potential victims, right? This is obviously, we want to do whatever we can proactively to protect our children from would-be predators. But just because we have access to our children more regularly and more consistently than we do to all the people they're going to encounter in the world, this is what we can do. But I think it just needs to be stated that, this is by no means making a child responsible for other people's behaviors or for keeping themselves safe. This is trying to set them up for safety. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so I think, I think that's in terms of, how much you want to share with your children about anything that you've been through, is really up to you, but we don't want to shame children for asking. And there are also kind of vague ways, like general ways you can say things without saying things like, certain things happened to me when I was growing up, sometimes that I don't like to talk about, but thank God you're growing up in a very safe, loving home. And, we know a lot and we can teach you a lot and, kind of move on, shift the focus onto them and whatever it is that you're, learning or talking about.
Yeah, so I have a question actually for my own question is based on what you said is that so if somebody has a family member that is a known predator, they know that or they heard a story but they're not sure if it's true. Like what should that approach be with that person? Because you were saying the onus is on us to protect our children, not on our children to protect themselves. So
Yeah.
should we be putting our children in a situation where they're like with that person?
No, definitely not. A known predator, never. They should never, ever, ever be alone with a known predator. Even if there's just a relative or a neighbor or someone in their life that gives you the creeps, then no, they should not be alone with them. Ever.
Alone? Oh, how about with you if you're in the house at the same time?
If a known predator, if you can avoid ever being with a known predator and children. I mean, most people that are offenders are not supposed to be within a certain radius of children. If they're in your family, I would say definitely invest in a session or two with a mental health professional who can guide you about establishing safety and boundaries for your children. If there's somebody in your immediate network that either you suspect is a danger or or whatever or has been in the past, but that's really, really complicated. So I would say definitely on a case-by-case basis. Always better to err on the side of caution. Always better to insult the family member or neighbor than to risk your child's safety.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
It's better not to insult people, but if someone earned the reputation.
If you had to choose, yeah. yeah, exactly. Okay, what to do when family members do things you don't enforce? You don't do to enforce safety, like kiss for a treat. Like you want a treat, give grandma a hug or a kiss. Come here. People do this all the time. I see this all the time.
They totally do. Yes.
Yeah.
So I would say like this, the same as I was mentioning before is when you are confronted with someone who is sort of parenting or engaging with your child in a way that runs counter to the values of your parenting and the way you want to raise your children, I would just assess it on the basis of frequency, gradation, and how damaging you find it to be. So if, grandma is in from another country and she only visits, once or twice a year, and you after the fact you found out, oh, I got a lollipop because I gave grandma a hug, and your kid doesn't seem to be very distressed by it, I don't know that you need to be like the parenting police on every little interaction if it feels completely innocent, but just kind of old school and not something that you agree with. That being said, you certainly have the prerogative and the right to if you want to. If it's someone who's going to be in your child's life on a regular basis, and or you see your child reacting in a stressed out kind of way, if they didn't like it, or you just want to kind of make sure like they're a person who you have a suspicion might be, not clued into boundaries or might, kind of take one step and then another and then another, then having a respectful conversation where you say, oh, thank you so much for offering the child a treat, but, I prefer if you just ask me first because, it's going to be dinner soon, or, we just like to know what the kids are having in terms of, treats, or even more importantly to say, what, in our house we teach, this is kind of the new generation of how we do this, but we teach children that, they don't ever have to give hugs or kisses to adults. We ask them if they want a hug or kiss. And if they say yes, then that's great. And if they say no, then we could just say, well, you know what? I just want you to know I'm really happy to see you and I love you. And again, healthy, respectful relatives will honor that, even if they think we're a little wacky. But, better they think we're wacky than our children's boundaries be crossed. So that would be, like a lot of these things, you kind of have to use common sense. Like not everything has to become a whole soapbox for a lecture to everyone, because like nobody wants to be around that person. But when there's any question of our child's, physical safety or psychological well-being or general discomfort, that has to be the priority.
Yeah, I love that you said that. It's so important. Okay, so I did see questions. I'm just going to finish off with my story and then ask you where we can get more of your content. And then we'll see if we have time to get to questions. Mm-hmm. So actually, growing up, my mother always taught me that you should never be alone with another adult in a room, which you mentioned that actually. And so she didn't really teach much about other things, but she did. That was one thing I really knew. I was once over when I don't even remember how old I was, maybe 7. I was at a friend's house. And the father actually called me down to the laundry room and locked the door. And right away, as soon as that happened, alarm bells go off in my mind. See, I had no idea what that even means, but I knew right away that shouldn't be happening. Like that's wrong, right? And that just shows you the power of teaching children like this is not okay. And so right away I said, why are you locking the door? And he said, nothing, I just want to ask you a few questions, And I said, why are you locking the door? Open the door. And I kept insisting. He kept trying to ask me questions, and I kept saying, open the door, open the door. And finally, he just opened the door and let me go. And I didn't even tell him out of the story because it didn't even feel traumatic or scary for me. I just was like, this shouldn't be happening. Something's wrong. And so I said something. Much later on, I actually found out that he actually was a sexual predator and he did sexually abuse children. And that's when suddenly the story came back to me and I was like, oh my gosh, that's what was happening, right? And I had no idea. But because I had this awareness that I should not be alone in a room with another person, that really helped me. So that just shows, and the story that I also shared, that teaching our children any of these things and all these things really, really can help us, can help children know, like, wait, something's wrong here. This shouldn't be happening, and I should be doing something about it, you know? And again, sometimes they can't. Sometimes, like, if he was scary and overpowering, maybe I wouldn't be able to do anything, you know? But sometimes we can. You know, so yeah.
Powerful story. Thank you so much for sharing that one. You know, we were prepping last night, kind of going through some of these questions, trying to figure out which ones to share. And Blimie shared that story with me. Incidentally, I'm like, that is such an important, powerful story. And again, we're not saying that means that teaching your children this will definitely save them. But in that situation, the little bit of knowledge that your mother gave you probably saved you from something really bad happening. And because you had the strength of clarity and character and courage to say, stop it right now, you scared him off. A more aggressive predator may not have been scared off, and that wouldn't have been your fault. You know, but again, that's what we talk about, you know, mitigating risk. So such a powerful story and such a, you know, important cautionary tale. Again, so upsetting that you had to go through that, but thankfully you had the tools to keep yourself relatively safe in that, you know, in that situation. So important. I have a couple of I just wanted to show, a little show and tell here. Let's talk.
I'm going to link these afterwards also. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know what? Yeah, we'll just link them. That'll be easier anyway. So there's like,
I'll tell you why you should do them quickly now, maybe if you have a few seconds, because people are not going to, like, this live is going to be saved. People are not going to always have access to my links. So do you mind just sharing them quickly?
Yeah. So, okay. So my body belongs to me from my head to my toes. And let's talk about body boundaries, consent, and respect. And they're also rain.org, RAINN.org. But honestly, if you just do a quick Google search of, like, you know, children's sexual safety, there's wonderful free online resources. You know, so there's, you know, if you want to make yourself knowledgeable, it doesn't take a whole lot of time or money to do that. The more you want to invest, the better it'll be. But, like, just start somewhere. That's a really, really great gift you could do for your children and your family.
Okay, so yeah, that's 100% true. So Elisheva, I want to ask you though. I know that you have a lot of content. You know, you have a course that I mentioned, and you have a blog and books and courses. So where can we get all that?
Okay, so on my website, elliechevalis.com is where I have my blog, which is like over 100 free articles, a lot of them on this topic. They're organized by topic. I also have a book, Find Your Horizon of Healthy Thinking, which is actually a G-rated book. And then I have my Sacred Not Secret course, A Religious Family's Guide to Healthy, Holy Sex Ed. That's also links. I have a whole bunch of digital courses. Everything, all my content is basically accessible on elliechevalis.com. So if you want to go there, there's free stuff, there's cheap stuff, there's more expensive stuff, something for everyone. But specifically the Sacred Not Secret course is something I actually made a promo code in you know, anticipation for some of this, like, safety education that we're going to be doing. So if you use code SAFE, SAFE, you can save a little money off the course. But in any case, like I said, there's plenty of free content out there, and to kind of embed it in the overall messaging of, you know, love and respect and safety and forming good, loving, respectful relationships will take it away from feeling like scary and alarming, and, you know, kind of put it in the context where it belongs.
Yeah, so like I said, I actually purchased your course and I love it, and it has totally empowered me as a parent to share this information with my children. So yes, I definitely recommend purchasing it. Thank you so much, Elisheva. I don't even know how much more time we have. Should we try to go through questions? Should we not? Like, I don't know what to do.
It's up to you. I mean, officially the hour is up, but sometimes Instagram lets you go a little longer. I think we got through all of the questions that we had chosen from the pre-registered questions.
Right.
So do you want to take a couple of minutes and go through these?
Yeah, let's see if it shuts the chat. Okay, but someone said over here, my 2-year-old touches his penis and shows excitement while we're in the potty. Well, yes. How do I teach them this is normal, but we don't do this in front of people?
Exactly like that. Exactly like that. Yes, that's your penis, and it does feel nice to touch it, but we don't do that in front of people.
Okay, awesome. I love that. Simple as that.
Question, so that's the answer.
Yeah, and I'll actually ask the question to, you know, follow that is what if you see a child masturbating? You know, like girls when they're younger or whatever. What should your response be?
Same thing. Totally the same thing. Totally the same thing. Yes, that's your vulva, that's your clitoris, that's your labia, you know, just kind of label it, tell them what it is, and then let them know, you know, but we do that privately. That's not for other people to see.
Right. Okay. And can we add like that feels good? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
that feels nice. Okay.
Yes, yes, yes. If you have religious objections to, self-touch, that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. It is something that I talk about in my course, but, from a psychological perspective in terms of the research, and especially for very young children, to just like acknowledge what they're doing and say, please don't do that in front of other people without shaming, without embarrassing, anything like that. That's good.
Okay. So at what age is it appropriate for a father to take their son to the mikvah on Erev Shabbos? So for any of you who don't know here, right, there's like, I guess you could probably explain it better than I can, what a mikvah is, a ritual immersion in water, right,
Yeah.
that people go to. Yeah. So I'm curious, actually, what's the answer to that question?
I don't know if I don't feel comfortable answering that because I'm not comfortable with kids going to the mikveh.
At all.
Yeah. And I
So that's your
understand.
answer.
I understand. And I'm saying this and in my own culturally limited way. I recognize, and I don't mean that to offend any particular communities. That's not how I grew up. It's not the community that I'm in right now. And it could be that if it's your communal norm, that there are therapists and professionals within your community who could guide you as to a way to do that in a way that feels boundary and normalized and appropriate. But I don't know a way to do that. So I'm not telling you what to do with your children. I'm just saying I don't feel comfortable commenting on it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, how would you respond if your child came and told you that another child has showed them their private parts?
Okay, that's a good question. It would depend on the age of the child, and it would depend on the relationship with the child, and it would depend on the reaction of the child who is telling me. But I would definitely say to tell the child, I'm so glad that you came to talk to me about it. What else happened? Kind of like let them, ask questions, so let them express their thoughts and feelings about what happened. Make sure that they feel safe and that they're not, because very often kids are not freaked out by that. They just know there's something about private parts that have to go telling mom and dad, and we don't want to like ever dismiss that notion. So like, thank you so much for telling me, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't show people your private parts. They probably just didn't know any different. Maybe you could tell them, next time, please don't show me your private parts. Because we don't want our kids to be like the annoying tattletale, get everybody in trouble kind of kid. But we just also wanted them to have those boundaries. And again, modeling the social skills, But again, it depends on the age, on the relationship. If any touch happens, it would really depend more on, but I think, really kind of tuning into the child and say, tell me more what happened. I'm so glad that you came to me.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. I really love that.
Yeah, even if a child comes to you, and this is outside the scope of our what I want to talk about today, but even if a child comes to you and says that someone did something more aggressive than that, even if you feel your throat jump down to your stomach or your stomach jump up to your throat, try not to freak your kid out, because they're coming to you, and you want to be the voice of like reassurance and safety, and it's okay. We'll talk about it. We're going to make sure we're going to take care of this together. So even if you're freaking out, don't be like, oh my God, who did that? No, don't freak out at them, because we want to make sure that they feel safe to come to us, and just reassure, don't worry, sweetie, you didn't do anything wrong. Come, help me understand what happens, and just, there's plenty of time to freak out alone with your spouse later. But just take it, take a breath and make sure your child can talk to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. My 5-year-old often tells my 2-year-old to give her a hug, and then she does. Is this wrong? Should I tell her to ask first?
Yeah, so I wouldn't go as far as saying it's wrong, but I would say that if you take away from this talk that maybe teaching them to ask first, I think that would be a wonderful idea.
Yeah. I definitely teach it to my kids. Like I said, now my kids say like, you don't have my consent. I love it. Okay. How about going to the bathroom with kids? Because remember we asked about showering with kids. People are saying, how about going to the bathroom? Oh my gosh, I've gone to the bathroom so many times with my kids, because when they're little, they just come in. You're like, I need to go to the bathroom.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, this is not like, it's not like there's a specific, clinical, legal, or religiously stated age that like, okay, this is the cutoff point. Again, do the best you can, but I think respecting parents, going to the bathroom privacy would fall into the same category as parents going to the shower privacy. So if you can, teach your child, you stay right outside the door while mom is in the bathroom, that's better. If you have to take them in for safety reasons, ask them, could you please turn around? I want some privacy, or you want to stand in the shower. Do the best you can. Definitely don't take them in for recreational reasons, only if they're so little that they need to be run in for safety reasons. But again, I would, you're hearing my bias. I believe in trying to keep those boundaries between parents and children. I'm a little old school that way. I know that. I don't think you're like, traumatizing your child if they spent time going into the bathroom, especially because they wanted to, meaning if you force your kid in, that's not so cool. But, if they wanted to come in because they wanted to be with mommy, not the end of the world. It's also very cultural and very subjective, but my preference would be to play it safe. It's just, keep those boundaries up as much as possible.
Okay, awesome. Okay, somebody asked, like, how do I teach this to a 3-year-old? It's a very, very vague, broad question, so I wasn't even sure if I should mention it.
Yeah, I think
because I think this whole talk was about
yeah,
that.
I feel like there was one particular topic, there was one particular question that we said, like, how do you teach consent to a 2-year-old? And we elaborated a lot on that. So I would leave that alone. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Someone said, can we please have this saved? I missed the first half. Definitely. We are going to save this, hopefully, if Instagram works in our favor, which it hopefully will. Okay, child wants to show dad for attention. How do I go about no without shaming? Hold on, I don't understand the question.
I think that's what they're saying. I think what they're saying is that probably what happened is one time the kid took off all their clothes and ran around the house, and dad was like chasing them and saying, stop it. So now they're doing it for attention. I'm guessing that's something like that is what happened.
Oh, okay.
So this is something I talk more extensively about in the course, but the gist of it is basically, it is totally normal that little kids like to run around naked. It is also totally appropriate for a parent to lovingly and unshamingly teach children that we don't run around naked in front of other people, even members of your own household, because sometimes you have people in the household that are not members of your household. And so part of being, growing up and learning, social decency is we don't run around naked. You have a beautiful little body, a very sweet little tushy, but you got to go put on some undies, So, tell them, I love your body, but you got to go put on your clothing and then you can come down.
Right. It's all about the way it's said. Like I remember growing up as a kid, I used to hear some parents say like, gross.
Ew, gross.
Yeah. Go put some clothes on. And I was like, that's such a negative message. Like, why are we saying gross? It's just that it's private. It's not gross.
Not gross, right. We don't want to give the gross message. We want to give the message of your body is beautiful. And now go put on some clothing and come down.
I love that. Your body's beautiful and private. Yeah. Okay. That's great. So the person actually elaborated safety with others, but I think that this whole entire talk was really about safety. This is the person who was asked about a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
This entire thing was about safety with others.
Yeah. It could be they missed the beginning, but we covered that at the beginning.
Right, exactly. Okay. So I think I went through all the questions that came in on here. I'm so happy we had, it looks like they're making the lives go longer these days or something.
Yes, that happened last time I did a live also. We crammed everything into an hour and then we had time. It's like, all right, let's talk. That's more they want to say. But I put a lot of time into kind of nailing down the questions that were going to be, because you got so many questions, but we tried to choose the ones that encapsulated the most, general, applicable, relevant, inclusive ideas.
Right.
Blimie, I like this kind of stuff with you because I love how your approach to parenting is so proactive and positive and not shaming of parents or children. It's such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. I feel the same way about you, really. So much of you say is so in alignment with my values. And so I so appreciate. Thank you for taking the time to come on here to really educate parents. I think you're doing holy work by doing this, honestly. And of course, thank you to all the parents who are here listening and really trying to do the best they can by their children. So I'm going to link all the stuff that some of the books that you mentioned and a few of the things. But as Elisheva said, of course, you can look her stuff up at elishevalist.com, or you can even Google about how to teach children about body boundaries and safety. Thank you so much again.
Oh, can I say one more thing, actually?
Yes, please do.
This is something we had actually talked a little bit about last night. I find that when it comes to any topic of parenting that's new or different, especially if you didn't get, clear parenting when you were a kid about this stuff, a lot of parents shy away from it completely because of lack of confidence. And even after hearing a live like this or reading an article or a book that makes them feel like, oh, I really need to do better, sometimes they're still scared to do it because they're like, what if I get it wrong? I don't want to mess this up. And what I would say is that, I say this cautiously and not in a flippant way, but action creates clarity. This is not my phrase, it's around, but taking a first step and doing something starts to generate clarity. Opening up the conversation, even if you don't know exactly where you want to take it, is still better than having no conversation. And done is better than perfect. So even if you don't have all the books and all of the articles and all of the clarity, start with something. And you'd be surprised how much you build confidence when you see your kids' eyes light up with appreciation, recognition, and relief that we can talk about these things. And even if you get it wrong, let's say you said something and you're thinking about it and you're like, you know what, I actually don't like the way I said that. Now I'm embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed. Go back to your kid and say, you know what, I explained something to you, but I actually want to correct myself. Here's what I think. I was thinking about it, or I spoke to someone, or I read something, and now I want to explain, differently. Because, starting the process off and kind of learning on the job is still better than completely not doing it altogether. Sorry, you gave such a nice goodbye, but I thought I wanted to.
No, I love that. I think it's so important. And by the way, from my personal experience, okay, first of all, done is better than perfect. I love that. And in my own personal experience, there's so many times where I was like, should I say this? What should I say? And exactly, I just said it. And by the way, sometimes I take a moment to think. Sometimes my kid would ask me and I'd say, just a moment, I want to think about this, And so to give me a little bit of time to formulate a response or whatever. But yeah, I'm also learning on the job. I think we all are. But it's so important, like you said, done is better than perfect. Just do it. you know?
Oh, somebody wrote something here about if you go to religious schools and saying this there is inappropriate according to teachers. I have an article on that too.
Oh, good.
Yeah. No, you know what? We have to do what's safe and right for our children. I remember years ago, we were looking into different schools, and one of the principals was giving us a tour of the school building, and the principal was so proud that the school building had tacked on all these little classrooms off to the side, like 2-person classrooms for tutoring, but like there were no windows, no cameras or anything. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is a predator's dream come true. It's so scary, you know? And so, you know, schools are working hard. They're probably doing the best they can. They're idealistic. They're doing, but you know what? They're not your child's parent. You're your child's parent. And you have to know that when you put your head on the pillow at night, you did your best to keep your child safe and healthy and protected. So hopefully, you know, schools, I think most schools are aware of the importance of safety, and they're catching up, and they're running programs, and they're talking to their staff. But, you know, it can't be perfect. And so we have to do our best to educate our children. And if they're going to run into a little bit of discomfort with their peers or with their teachers, a little bit of friction because of it, okay. You know, okay, sometimes it's not a bad life lesson to know that sometimes you could do the right thing, and even adults will misunderstand you. You know, better safe than sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And I have no issue calling a teacher. If a teacher calls me and says, you know, your daughter said this, I have no problem talking to the teacher about it. So
yeah, I've done that too. Yeah,
exactly. You know what? My children's safety comes first, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Priorities.
Okay. Yeah. Someone's saying I want to caution my daughter, but not create fear. So we
touched on that already. Yeah.
We did. Exactly. If you watch the live, you'll see that. So anyway, again, thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing all your knowledge and information with parents, with us, with me. And that's it. Have a good one.
All day, Blimie. Thank you for having me.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye. I have to end this. How do I end this? That was the question. I have no idea how to do this. Like literally. Okay. Help. Oh, X. Now I know how to do it.